Good morning, everyone. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. If you can't hear me, can you send us a chat message or raise your hand in some way?
Okay, let's assume people can hear us here.
Yeah, I'll just assume everyone can hear me since we didn't really get any messages here. I know that people will still be continuing to join us. We have over 100 people attending this particular webinar. So welcome to the PRS Pharmacy Services CBD for Pharmacy webinar. This is the second webinar in the series. My name is Linda Barnes, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Strategic Alliances here at PRS. For those of you who may not be familiar with PRS, we are a pharmacist-owned and operated independent pharmacy consulting firm that has been working to help independents since 1982 with everything from compliance to brokerage and now CBD education. If you did not have a chance to attend or listen to our last webinar, we recommend that you do that because we covered a lot of topics in that webinar. And as you can see here, we talked about things like what is CBD? We briefly covered the ECS. We discussed laws, the FDA, State Board of Pharmacy statements and rulings, and more. You can head over to prsmarketplace.com and click on the webinars link to view it. And we definitely recommend that you check that out. Okay, we have a lot to cover today. We've had over 100 questions submitted, some about the ECS and some about other topics, and we want to try to get to all of them today. Remember, this webinar is interactive, so if you have questions during the webinar, feel free to ask them using the chat feature, and we will try to answer them as well as we go on. This is really interactive. We're going to interact with each other too. So the topics we will cover today include the endocannabinoid system, called the gatekeeper of homeostasis, and we're going to explore why. We're going to talk about the history and discovery of the ECS and CBD and how it works. We will explore cannabinoid receptor types and distribution throughout the body. We will talk about the endocannabinoids, recent FDA information, State Board of Pharmacy rulings, state laws, dosing and interaction information, brands, and lastly, we will take any additional questions you might have. We have two experts in the CBD space that will be joining us today, but before I introduce them, I first want to give you a little bit of information to start. One of the two most common questions regarding CBD that we hear is how can it work on so many different body systems, and why does CBD work? Well, the answer to these questions opens a window into a complex system that science is still making sense of. The endocannabinoid system. So here today to help you understand everything you need to know about CBD and the endocannabinoid system for pharmacy is Evan and Tim Gregorius. And for those of you wondering, no, Evan is not adopted. They actually are related. So Evan joins us as a freelance project advisor here at PRS. He has extensive experience working in the CBD space. Most notably, he has assisted with the formulation of several commercially successful CBD products. He has presented at CBD and cannabis industry conferences, including the 2018 Cannabis Conference in Miami and VMX 2018, the largest veterinary convention in the US. He has worked with numerous CBD companies on their digital marketing efforts and content, and we are happy to have his expertise here today. Our other speaker, our in-house CBD for Pharmacy guru, is Tim Gregorius. Tim is a registered pharmacist who is our current VP of Operations here at PRS. He is an expert on the subject of CBD for pharmacy and most notably is involved in a major project involving education, training, brand recommendations with a national independent pharmacy organization. So without further delay, I'm going to turn things over to Tim.
Thank you, Linda. We've got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to jump right into it. Good morning, everyone. Endocannabinoid system for pharmacists. That's a challenging task to take on. We're trying to describe an entire human body system in 30 minutes. Well, we're going to try and paint a picture of what is known today, even though most of that information is still in its infancy. Regardless, we're going to try to paint that picture in very broad strokes without getting bogged down in unnecessary detail. However, in those details is where the beauty of this elegant and complex system lies. As we discussed last time on the webinar in June, there are so many claims of what CBD can do out there culturally, in our families, on the internet, that it's really easy to look at all of these claims skeptically and say, well, is this CBD oil the 21st century snake oil? And it's easy to feel that way until one grasps how pervasive the endocannabinoid system is in homeostasis and the role of endocannabinoids and the role that they play in virtually every metabolic reaction in the human body. To give that a little bit of weight to that statement, come on, every metabolic reaction in the body. Recent research is telling us that it looks like the endocannabinoid system has been evolving in chordates, animals with a spinal cord, for at least 650 million years. So I know a lot of things can happen in 650 million years, and I know these sound like grandiose, exaggerated statements, but if you look, if you allow us to show you, we're going to look today at some simple examples of how this, this grandiose, these big statements that everyone is making. Our hope is that through a couple of these simple examples, we'll help you develop a curiosity and a respect for the endocannabinoid system and the role that it plays in every reaction, nearly every reaction at the cellular level, which begins to then describe how it can be involved in things like sleep, depression, pain, cancer, and the 150 other things that CBD is being given credit for.
So I just want to thank everyone for your questions. As I mentioned before, we got over 100 questions. I'm sort of just changing pace here a little bit with Tim. So with all of the questions that we got, we were able to group them into some themes. The first being, how does CBD work? What is the mechanism of action? We hear that a lot, mechanism of action. Can you speak to that?
I can. The mechanism of action of how CBD works, it inhibits the endocannabinoid receptors. That's the easy way to do that. I'm gonna jump back here, Linda, off of that question for a moment. I realize we're sort of going out of order here, folks. Sorry for that, but let me first bring you into an understanding of who some of the people are who are doing the research and what they're saying about the endocannabinoid system. Dr. Ruth Ross, she has been a researcher in the endocannabinoid space for more than 20 years. In late winter this year, she gave a TED Talk, and it is, I highly recommend it, and we have a link to it at the end of this webinar. One of the big takeaways that I got from Dr. Ross's TED Talk was that she put out the idea that there are 3 myth-busting notions that everyone has to understand before we begin to understand the endocannabinoid system. She says those 3 notions are: the endocannabinoid system exists in you before you're born. The endocannabinoid system exists in humans who have never been exposed to cannabis, and the endocannabinoid system explains how CBD works, but CBD is not why the endocannabinoid system works. Look, to provide a really brief background here, Evan was working with one of the most prominent CBD manufacturers in the country just a few years ago when he began to try to get my wife and I to try CBD. For those of you that were on the June webinar, I had talked about my wife's arthritis. Well, naturally, Evan is trying to get us to try CBD. I resisted, thinking if there was any truth to what he was saying that CBD could do, surely I would know about it, and it would be common knowledge to everyone in the healthcare community. And surely a development of this size, pharmacy would be at the tip of the spear of. Well, let me publicly apologize to Evan that he was out in front of this phenomenon, as all of our presence on this call would indicate. Linda, thanks for letting me jump through that. But yeah, back to that question. The mode of action is a question that a lot of you have. Literally, I think maybe a third of the questions we have is, how does CBD work? Why does it work? What's its mechanism of action? And as I said briefly, it inhibits endocannabinoid receptors. We're going to get into the weeds on these, and we'll try to make that as painless as possible as we go on here in just a few moments before we get into the weeds. I would like for Evan to give us just a little brief description of how the mechanism of action of CBD works.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here on this webinar with you. So as he said, CBD inhibits endocannabinoid receptors in 4 words. What does that mean? What does that do in the body? How does that relate to everything else we know? So CBD is a negative modulator of CB1 and CB2 receptors. This matters because those 2 cannabinoid receptors comprise about 60% of all protein receptors in the human body. You heard me right. There are more cannabinoid receptors in your body than all other receptors combined. So there could be 100,000 books written about that,
and there will be.
Essentially, by mildly inhibiting those receptors, CBD leads the endocannabinoid system to compensate by upregulating its own expression. So CBD inhibits the receptors, which has the net effect of inducing the endocannabinoid system overall. In addition, CBD inhibits key enzymes that are really required for the inflammatory cascade to take place, which is very similar to how NSAIDs work and many other legend drugs that you've all prescribed. So we'll talk more about those 2 actions shortly.
That's actually going to be an example that I think we're going to look at here in a few minutes. But again, to frame this, Linda has a couple other questions.
Yeah, so the themes, really, we were able to group them into themes, but one of the most pervasive questions that we got too was, why didn't we learn about this in school? So if this endocannabinoid system is such a big deal, how come we didn't learn about this in pharmacy school? And why isn't this being taught in medical schools?
Well, that's kind of the reason that we're all on this call. And as I had said before, when Evan was saying you guys need to try CBD, I'm thinking, what's he talking about? Why is this such a big deal? How can this, I haven't heard about it. I'm a pharmacist. Why is this such a big deal all of a sudden? Well, the reason that we don't know about it, and we're trying to educate ourselves retroactively here, is it wasn't discovered until very recently. If you are 35 years old or older, you were already out of school. You were out of pharmacy school before the endocannabinoid system was even presented or figured out and first discovered, let alone how impactful it is. So literally, it's just a matter of timing. It's that new, folks. This is a big deal. Imagine when someone figured out the endocrine system. I don't even know when that happened historically, but it changed how we think about disease states. We're at that historic moment in time with the endocannabinoid system. So much so that in 2015, only 13% of medical schools even mentioned the endocannabinoid system in their curriculum. Evan, what did you say, like 21 out of 100?
Yeah, there are 151 accredited medical schools in this country, and as of November of 2015, only 21 of those schools even included a mention of the word endocannabinoid at some point in their curriculum, but none of them offered a course dedicated to it. So it's brand new, and if you graduated before 2010-ish, then you did not hear about it.
So why do I have a slide up then that says the 1940s if this is something that new, that if just over the last 20 years? It's because this is when the initial discoveries were made. THC had become a thing. Marijuana was a thing. They knew there were a couple of chemicals involved, and they weren't really sure what was going on. Well, let's fast forward about 20 years into the early 1960s, and that's when Raphael Mechoulam is giving credit for having sparked the genesis of cannabis research when he isolated the structure of THC. It was 1940s, so 20 years they had been searching, and just a short time after he finds the structure of THC, he finally elucidates the structure for CBD. He stays at it. So looking at this timeline, so in the 1960s, and so it's through the 70s, research is continuing. Not a lot's happening. A lot of people are smoking marijuana in the 70s. I was there. But not a lot of things were found in research, right? Full 30 years later, after he isolates the structure of THC, he discovers the first endocannabinoid, which is anandamide. And we're going to be talking about anandamide here. These endogenous cannabinoids are just amazing. And please allow us, to try to describe some of this to you. But we're trying to set up just a big picture here of what's going on. So for 30 years he works. In 92, by 95, they elucidate the structure of the second endocannabinoid. So you can see there that from 92 to 2005, a lot happened. This timeline explains that initial question: why don't I know about this? How didn't I learn about this in school? Why aren't physicians taught this in school? We are at the infancy of the research here. So the endocannabinoid system is I can't overstate how big a discussion this is. That we're not talking about how marijuana gets you high, or, that's what they thought back in the 60s and 70s when this research was going on. This is truly a human body system, no less important, pervasive, or impactful as all the systems we have up there, the cardiovascular system, endocrine, reproductive. This is a body system. So it really is important that we learn this as a foundation before we can ever really discuss what CBD is and how it does and what we should be telling patients. We need to understand the big picture here. Hard to understand the big picture of the endocannabinoid system without this man. We could probably do a couple of hours of discussion and education just on Ethan Russo and who he is and what he has brought to the table.
So Tim, I think it's important to say who Ethan Russo is. We put some information up here in a quote of his, which of course you're going to discuss, but Ethan Russo is a board certified neurologist. He's currently the science director for International Cannabis and Cannabinoids Institute. He was really at the forefront. He's the first person to recognize this thing of a clinical endocannabinoid deficiency. And of course, the former senior medical advisor to GW Pharmaceuticals, which we discuss a little bit in the future here.
As you know, I don't like to read slides when we're doing a webinar, but I'm going to make an exception here on this one because it's important enough to say out loud and for you to hear. The endocannabinoid system is a homeostatic regulatory system that forms the cornerstone of a vast signaling network found in all vertebrates, including humans. The ECS effectively regulates regulation for physiological processes. Regulates regulation. Ev, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a pretty profound thing to say. And Ethan Russo, without him, we would not be having this webinar, and CBD probably wouldn't be as big as it is.
Yeah, how is it possible that the endocannabinoid system regulates regulation?
Yeah, so, regulation is important, and it could be said that without it, things fall out of balance. How does the endocannabinoid system regulate regulation? Well, the two primary endocannabinoids are anandamide, which is arachidonyl ethanolamide, and 2-AG, which is 2-arachidonyl glycerol. The endocannabinoid system is able to maintain homeostasis because arachidonic acid, its only precursor, comprises about a quarter, about 25% of all cell membrane lipids. Endocannabinoids are produced when a cell is injured or insulted in order to restore homeostasis to that cell. So there's sophisticated interplay between the endocannabinoids and the enzymes that produce and degrade them, and that's because restoring homeostasis means many different things at different times. Sometimes it means increasing metabolic activity, other times it means decreasing it, and the system to maintain that has to be able to turn it up or down like a volume control rather than just on or off like a power button.
That's incredible. Again, reading Russo, having discussions with Evan bringing some of his understanding and research to the table. Homeostasis doesn't exist without the endocannabinoid system. That was one of those aha moments for me. That we learn about homeostasis in 5th grade science class. And only now in the 2000s, again, Russo's been working for 20 years on this at least, but only now, it's 2019, and we're having a webinar describing this, because had I not been researching this, I promise you, if I'm in the pharmacy filling prescriptions, as I presume most of you are, I'm never going to hear this or see this or understand this. We're being asked, what about CBD? And we really need to understand just this really large sort of kairotic moment, this change that is going on in the healthcare world right now. All right, well, I'm going to apologize to you a little bit ahead of time. We're going to get into the weeds here a little bit on a notion of lipid signaling. Again, it's important to get a basic understanding of how pervasive the ECS is. And I'm going to let Evan here dive into the weeds, and we'll try to pull them back out before it gets too painful for all of us.
Yeah, I won't go too far into the weeds here, but basically, for homeostasis to be maintained, the system that does that needs to have its resources readily available in every part of the body. Well, lipids make up the cell membrane of all cells, so they're pretty much available in every part of the body. The endocannabinoid enzymes are the only enzymes in the body that really liberate arachidonic acid from the cell membrane. As we mentioned, converting it into the endocannabinoids anandamide or 2-AG. When these endocannabinoids are degraded, free arachidonic acid enters the cell, which signals the immune system cyclooxygenase enzymes to use that arachidonic acid in the production of prostaglandins and therefore inflammation. So it's profoundly important in the production of inflammation, which is the body's way of healing itself.
It's 11 o'clock in the morning. We're having a little chemistry class here. Thanks, Ev. Let's try to use an example, though, that'll make this make a little more sense to those of us involved here on this call. Let's use an example of a condition that has baffled medical science for years: fibromyalgia. There are a lot of new theories about how and why CBD works with fibromyalgia, but as recently as over the past year or so, we're clueless to how and why this works. Some of these discoveries by Russo and other people doing that level of research are giving us a little bit of a window into fibromyalgia. And if you would talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, fibromyalgia has been written off for decades because there aren't many real differences between the nerves of fibromyalgia patients and those of neurotypical individuals until you look at the endocannabinoid system. The only real common denominator between those with fibromyalgia and people without fibromyalgia is that fibromyalgia nerves have a significant lack of CB1 receptors. What we've learned is the function of CB1 receptors is essentially to raise the threshold at which sensation becomes pain. So a lack of CB1 receptors means a low pain threshold. So CBD inhibits the few CB1 receptors that you do have, which leads your body to compensate by upregulating or inducing those CB1 receptors, thereby raising the pain threshold, which is a fundamental function of homeostasis.
When we allow that to sink in, that is one of the reasons that the endocannabinoid system is taking on miraculous notions, and people are talking about it in terms of, you got to be kidding. So now we're understanding the endocannabinoid system is upregulating cells to mediate pain or not. It's just one of those unbelievable things that the system is actually able to induce itself. It's an inducible process, the expression of the endocannabinoid receptors. I read, and I had mentioned this back in June, that the system is capable of inducing itself 100-fold. Phenomenal. Imagine if the opioid receptors in our body were able to do that. So fibromyalgia is an example of when induction is beneficial, and I think we're going to find going forward that is how they're going to be creating drugs and designing drugs into the future. All right, Ev, so the endocannabinoid system is inducing receptors in response to pain. You made that pretty clear. Well, pain and the inflammatory process, they're pretty closely related. Is this mechanism the same as how NSAIDs work?
Not exactly, but it's extremely similar. So NSAIDs and other anti-inflammatory drugs typically inhibit the cyclooxygenase enzymes COX-1 and 2. These enzymes produce pro-inflammatory prostaglandins. But those enzymes can't liberate arachidonic acid from the membrane to do that. They rely on the endocannabinoid system to provide arachidonic acid via degradation of anandamide or 2-AG. Only then can the immune system create prostaglandins to initiate inflammation. As you can see, the COX-1 and 2 enzymes depend on ECS metabolite arachidonic acid to produce prostaglandins. By preventing the breakdown of anandamide and 2-AG, you essentially starve the immune system of necessary precursors for inflammation. In essence, this anti-inflammatory process works one step before NSAIDs in the inflammatory cascade. Now, that's all really complicated, and there could be molecular biology classes on it, but you're all familiar with the drug that works in this exact fashion: Tylenol.
This was one of those aha moments I've had over the past 6 months in investigating the endocannabinoid system and talking to experts, and Evan and I taking deep dives on this. Tylenol. Suddenly, it's not so mysterious how the endocannabinoid system seems to work in the ways it does. It holds the key for us to understand the mechanism of action of Tylenol. The endocannabinoids work because of their molecular structure. This next slide, when we look here at the similarity of these chemicals, so we're looking at the two endocannabinoids and we're looking at the active metabolite of Tylenol. When that sinks in and you see how similar these are, we see that Tylenol's active metabolite is just like arachidonic acid, anandamide. The body is already doing what we ask Tylenol to do. So we have been using Tylenol pervasively in our society for decades, really not sure how it works. I literally, again, when Evan was going down the chemistry class parts of this with me, I Googled mechanism of action of acetaminophen, and we still don't know. Officially, formally, it's not entirely understood. Well, I think that's changing. We now know that it's mimicking these endocannabinoids, and it looks like our understanding from 2019 forward is going to be completely different.
Okay, I'm gonna move you along here. Let's talk about retrograde signaling.
Yeah, let's shift gears here. Ev, talk to us about retrograde signaling.
Okay, so as I'm sure you all know, typical neurotransmission goes from the presynaptic cell to the postsynaptic cell. That's called anterograde neurotransmission. What we've learned, and it's been postulated for about 60 or 70 years, that there has to be a retrograde system to regulate that process. Well, it's called the endocannabinoid system. Whenever in about 20 different neurotransmitter systems, including glutamate, GABA, dopamine, and serotonin systems, the primary neurotransmitter moves from presynaptic to postsynaptic, and then endocannabinoids are released in a retrograde direction from the postsynaptic cell backwards to inhibit the release of the primary neurotransmitter. So again, another fundamental role in homeostasis at a molecular level that we just didn't know until recently.
Well, and to bring that home again, for all you pharmacists and technicians and others on this call, that reminds me of the SSRIs. When I first saw this graphic that was just up there, and this graphic, it reminded me of the time in pharmacy school that I grasped the concept of the inhibition of the reuptake process. That retrograde notion, it was fascinating, right? We all learned that, we understand it, we understand how the inhibition of reuptake works. Amazing that process can be leveraged to take advantage of the full therapeutic value of processes in the body. Well, multiply that by 1,000 when it comes to the endocannabinoid system is where we are.
Yeah, just like SSRIs inhibit the breakdown of serotonin, CBD, and we now know Tylenol, inhibit the breakdown of endocannabinoids in a similar fashion. So
I hope that's not lost on you folks. The Tylenol example was such a simple one. It was an aha moment for me, and I hope we just shared that with you.
So one of the questions that we had, I think this is probably a great time to ask this question, is, Evan, can you talk a little bit about aging? And somebody had asked about geriatrics and what happens to your endocannabinoid system as you age.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, back to what Ethan Russo said about regulating regulation, a lot of conditions that occur have a very strong component of endocannabinoid deficiency involved with them, and aging is one of those processes. So one of the primary functions of cannabinoid receptors is that they function as a cellular countdown clock to sort of establish the cellular age, and once there are too few cannabinoid receptors, apoptosis is triggered in a majority of cells. So here, the endocannabinoid system is pivotal in cellular aging, in the actual countdown of what the age of the cell is.
And what's not clear to me, and I don't think any of us have the answer for right now, is does that individual cellular aging process and that countdown, does that then correlate directly into the aging of the organism? So again, how profound a question this really is when it looks like a simple question.
Okay, so let's keep it moving here because we're actually getting questions. I want you to know that if you have submitted a question right now, we are going to get to answering it. But some of the other questions that we had submitted prior to, and of course questions that we're always getting, have to do with the laws. So let's talk about the FDA.
We addressed the FDA and state and national laws at length in the previous webinar in June, but I do realize that a lot of you aren't on this. But again, we invite you to go back and listen to those. But what I'm going to do is try and pull some highlights out of those discussions that we know. The FDA has come out and made several statements over the past 6 months. And let me start off with the number one thing they have said is the FDA's main concern with CBD is that manufacturers, retailers, healthcare providers, and that purely relates to pharmacy, we cannot make therapeutic claims about CBD. That's where they've drawn the line. So that's not something we can argue about. It's not something that we can really discuss. We can try to understand it, but we cannot make therapeutic claims about CBD because the FDA has not ruled yet on whether it's safe and effective. Yes, Epidiolex is out there, and it is a legend drug, but that is in a very narrow use of those two pediatric epileptic conditions. So everything we know about CBD formally, those things that we can talk about formally as licensed healthcare providers, we have to get from Epidiolex. Anything past that, the FDA has drawn a line. Let me quote Dr. Amy Abernathy, who's the current FDA Deputy Commissioner. After their May 31st hearing, she wanted people to be aware of 5 key takeaways. There's a serious need for regulatory clarity. Consumer safety is paramount. Nationwide labeling requirements are coming. Dosing guidelines are necessary, and time is of the essence. None of where the FDA is right now and where pharmacy is with CBD is lost on the FDA. They got caught between a rock and a hard place, and the internet set up a situation that had never really happened in this country before, where people were buying to the tune of millions of people every month were buying CBD before the FDA had really gotten out there and made rulings on whether it was safe and effective and so on. So now they're playing catch up. They're aware of that. They're struggling to get through it. On May 31st, they held a public hearing. They had an open comment section until July 2nd. So right now we are in this 60-day gray period where they have said, give us 60 days to come out with the next statement. So we're expecting sometime late summer, early fall, that the FDA will have their next word. Exactly what that means and what that's going to be, we will all have to wait and see. As you can see, Linda popped up the State Board of Pharmacy reactions. This is the other main line of questioning that we're still getting today, and I expect we're going to be getting this line of questioning for a while. When it comes to state boards of pharmacy, the number changes on virtually a daily basis. Excuse me. But between 13 and 15 state boards of pharmacy in the country have made statements about pharmacies selling CBD. The good news is that means 35 haven't. 35 states are silent on this point, and and let me also say there are pharmacies in those 15 states still selling CBD, even at the negative behest of the State Board of Pharmacy. Let me give you one example of how confusing this is. So we had the Farm Bill make industrial hemp legal last December. We had the FDA come out and say, yeah, but it's not safe and effective. Let's not be making any therapeutic claims. I think daily or weekly, we have pharmacists or state representatives and governors making rulings that go counter to the FDA and what state boards of pharmacy are saying. So in Ohio, just last week, Governor DeWine signed a bill legalizing the agriculture of hemp in Ohio so that hemp could be sold and raised as a cash crop, and it's now legal in Ohio. However, Ohio's State Board of Pharmacy has still they're standing by their ruling that they came out with about 9 months ago, that until the FDA gives us very clear direction, pharmacists in Ohio are not to be selling CBD. That puts us in that ugly situation where somebody comes into us asking for help, asking about CBD, asking for our counsel, and we have to say, sorry, can't help you. But that person can walk out of your pharmacy and walk into a gas station just down the road. Obviously, that's not where any of us want to be. The takeaway from this is call your state board of pharmacy and find out exactly what you need to be doing in your state.
Okay, Tim, one of the other big questions that we get a lot have to do with drug interactions and dosing. So can we talk a little bit about drug interactions?
Absolutely. Drug interaction and dosing go hand in hand right now, though, because the interactions, everything we know formally, again, is from the data on Epidiolex, which was very narrow research, and it was mostly in children, and it was at phenomenally high doses that are required to treat those 2 pediatric epileptic conditions. So there are things we absolutely know. We know that CBD is metabolized by the cytochrome P450, CYP3A4, and CYP2C19. So every other drug that is metabolized by those 2 enzymes are going to be affected by CBD in the body. Again, this comes down to a self-education. You're going to need to understand this. There's a list of about 600 drugs that are affected by CBD. But again, the research is not extensive. There have been no long-term studies. So we can't jump to any conclusions either on its safety or efficacy.
Yeah, it's just very clear that CBD and the endocannabinoid system is involved in how many drugs that are commonly prescribed work, and that out of about the 500 most prescribed drugs in this country, recent research has shown that about a little bit over 400 of those 500 drugs have some effect on the endocannabinoid system in addition to how we thought they work solely. So it's just there more research is needed in this direction.
And the question was also about dosing and dosage forms. And the route of administration of CBD is typically, the majority of people use it today as a sublingual oil. That seems to be the dosage form, the route of administration that one gets the most bioavailability from, with the exception of smoking it, and whether that's smoking directly CBD or smoking marijuana, smoking hemp. But that's not something we're going to discuss in a pharmacy discussion, and certainly not something we're going to be making available to our customers on a regular basis. So I tend to just discount that when we're talking about CBD in pharmacy and what pharmacists need to know. So we're talking mostly about the difference between the ingestible CBD products, which we discussed the first pass, leaves you at a 2 to 7% bioavailability. So if someone's eating a gummy or a product, an ingestible product, they're likely getting a sub-therapeutic dose of CBD into their body. When it comes to dosing, it's tough, again, for me in this public forum to be talking about dosing when the FDA has said, no, this is all we got, Epidiolex, here's what you need to know and do. The reality is my wife's been taking CBD oil for a couple of years, and I could really have a discussion with you getting down and dirty about CBD and what the dose should be and where you should start at. And again, as healthcare providers, we just need to be very careful making therapeutic claims. Linda.
So one of the other questions that we had, I think this one is a pretty pervasive question too, that we get a lot. And I think this could mean a lot of different things, but how do we know what's real and what isn't? I think with regard to either the product or the information, how do they know?
Yeah, that question was beautiful. I don't know which one of you asked that question. What's real and what's not? When we saw that come across with the registration, that's why we're having this webinar, right? We're trying to, and I'm looking at the screen right now, we're trying to demystify everything that we're talking about. So great question. I don't know how to answer it. I took the question two ways. What's real? What's real is CBD is a drug. The endocannabinoid system is a real human body system, not something we knew about, something I didn't know about 2 years ago, but medical science didn't know about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's real, and we need to understand that going forward. If that question meant what's real when talking about CBD products in the marketplace, very different answer to that question. What's real is up to each of us to determine, and that's important for product selection. We better know what's in the bottle that we're handing to a customer. If it says 1,000 milligrams of CBD are in this bottle, we really want to have some assurance that it is, because there's statistics all over the place that, I've seen it from 30% once they do an assay, 30% of the products are mislabeled, to 80% of the products are mislabeled. So one of the reasons that PRS is endeavoring into this educational webinar series for pharmacists and CBD is we need to be really educated on these important points, what products to use, what to tell our patients, because we can't wait for the FDA. People are coming in and talking to us today, and they're going to call you at home, and you have neighbors and family members and coworkers. We need to understand this, and so I can tell you that what is real, you need to find that out for yourself. One of the ways to do that is to look at the certificate of analysis for each product that you're going to sell in your store. And that's something that if this is a reputable company, it should be readily available and should be able to tell you down to a couple of decimal points of what the what the percentage of CBD is in the bottle.
So I have another question that's kind of related to that, knowing what's in the bottle, right? So is it safe for law enforcement and military, or really anyone who would be getting drug tested, to take CBD? And I think that plays right into the what's real and what isn't, what's in the bottle.
That's a question that follows right up what I was just saying about you better know what's in the bottle. Because if you're buying it at a gas station and we really don't know where it came from, and there's not an assay attached, there's not a certificate of analysis, was this CBD that was extracted from marijuana, not from industrial hemp? If so, there could be THC there. Let me say this, that if it is CBD extracted from industrial hemp, and all of the safeguards and all of the best lab practices are taken, and there's a certificate of analysis, I would say that, if I had a CDL or I was being drug tested and I was using CBD, I would make sure I trusted the product that I was using. I mean, that's the easy answer to that. You have a thought on that, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, you just got to trust the manufacturer, because the science says, CBD has distinct metabolites from THC. It will not, cause a false positive as long as there's no THC in the product you're taking. So you just got to be sure with the product, and that goes back to what's real in the marketplace versus what's real in the endocannabinoid system.
So okay.
Let me finish a thought there, Linda.
Okay.
Sorry. We're really trying to react to the new questions coming in, but I want to get back to Ethan Russo for a moment, as I just made that statement about stay tuned. This again, to try to portray the gravity of what's going on with endocannabinoid research. First of all, he is a historical figure. We're living in real time, and I believe in the future, people will be looking back at Ethan Russo's career in awe at what this guy discovered and how he changed history going forward. Here's a talk that he's giving in September in Boston. So that's how real this is. The research is going on in laboratories today, and they're discovering things that they're trying to get out to the world. So we probably know some just minuscule percentage about the endocannabinoid system that we're going to know in 5 years or 10 years from now. So what he's talking about in September in Boston at the International Cannabis and Cannabinoid Institute, the importance of understanding the ECS in drug design and formulations. He's saying that going forward, it would be irresponsible for any drug manufacturer to think about designing a drug without considering the endocannabinoid system. That's amazing. Thinking back to, maybe 2 years ago, none of us had heard about the endocannabinoid system. And now they're talking about it would be irresponsible for a drug today to be designed without all the endocannabinoid system understanding, and to design a drug without that. To me, that's just groundbreakingly crazy.
Yeah, it's really a testament to the profound importance and pervasiveness of the endocannabinoid system in the body. And not only going forward can we not ignore the endocannabinoid system and drugs' effect on it, but looking backwards, and I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, that drugs including steroids, NSAIDs, SSRIs, benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, immunomodulatory drugs, hundreds of different drugs that have been prescribed for decades. When we go back and look at how they work, part of their action is mediated through manipulation of the endocannabinoid system.
And we had no idea.
And we didn't even know it.
The Tylenol example speaks to that in a huge way. Linda's tapping my arm here that we got questions we're going to get to. So
I'm going to keep Evan talking real quick, because one of the questions that we had submitted, I am going to get to some live questions here too, but one of the questions that we had submitted was, how does this work in an Alzheimer's patient? So how is the ECS important in that type of a system? Yeah,
so as with other aging-related disorders, there is, we know that amyloid beta plaque builds up, and that's what produces the symptoms of Alzheimer's. We don't know why it builds up. Well, then we learned that there is profound endocannabinoid deficiency involved in the Alzheimer's phenotype.
So deficiency in the endocannabinoid system looks like it might be one of the causative factors
Exactly.
of Alzheimer's
And
buildup.
one of the other questions that I saw in there had to do with Blackburn's Nobel Prize winning research.
Yeah, someone just commented.
Yeah, she won the Nobel Prize in, I think, 2009 for her research on, quote, the telomere effect, and how degraded telomeres are involved in aging, and that they're the end caps of the chromosomes, and they protect the genome. And one thing that we learned that's profoundly intertwined in that is that endocannabinoid regulated antioxidant activity protects against telomere breakdown. So she won the Nobel Prize, and then we learned that what she won the Nobel Prize for is coupled to the endocannabinoid system in an ignorable way.
Absolutely. Okay, so another question we just had submitted was, other than being non-psychoactive, how does CBD differ from THC?
Chemically, Ev, you go ahead and take that one.
This one's simple. THC is an agonist, is a partial agonist of the cannabinoid receptors. CBD inhibits the receptors from being able to be activated and bound by agonists. So CBD balances the effect of THC. And one of the first drugs that was approved, I believe, in the UK in 2005, Nabiximols, Sativex, is a 50-50 mixture of CBD and THC. And one of the surprising things that they found is in a 50-50 mixture, it doesn't really produce psychoactive activity. So that was just an important discovery in the relationship between those.
Yep. We're hurrying along
Yeah,
here.
we're moving along here. So another question we had was, how do I increase sales? How do I become the expert? Is this important for me to become the expert in CBD?
Well, that is a fantastic and topical question. My answer to that is education. How do you become the expert? Exactly what you're doing. You're listening, you're understanding, we're reading, we have to understand. Would we really think about selling something if we didn't understand it? Increasing sales has to be secondary to being the expert. You're not going to be the expert until you educate yourself. This world is moving quickly, this ECS world. So staying ahead of this is very important right now. I do appreciate everybody putting their time into this. I hope this has been beneficial for everyone. Linda?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. If you guys, the screen that's been up is all Tim's information. Please feel free to continue to email your questions or call Tim. We love to keep him busy. The last webinar that we had, he was super busy right afterwards with calls, personal calls that people wanted to discuss very specific subjects. We are involved right now in a project to vet brands. We're having some questions about brands as well. So we want you to know that we're thinking about that being maybe our next webinar subject that we're going to focus on. But we want you to email us your ideas as well. Please continue to do that. This is interactive, and we want to continue to provide you the information that you're looking for.
For sure. I invite the calls, honestly. And if I can't answer the question, we'll find a way to get it answered. You can call and email and talk to Evan and I for sure. Let me address that idea of brands in another way. We got a question that just came up about what brands are reputable. That's not the purpose of this forum. So I'm really, first of all, what we're doing is we are working on another question we had is, do I get CE credit for this? No, I apologize. We're working on that.
Not yet.
And keeping ourselves free of any product endorsement is going to be important. I have personal feelings, and as Linda had said, PRS, we are vetting several pharmacy-worthy manufacturers right now, and they're out there. There are more than a few manufacturers that, as a pharmacist, you could feel secure and safe in dispensing. But again, it's back to education, and this isn't quite the forum for me to answer that question.
and this may be another thing. I know you have I already know what you're going to say to this person, but somebody had just commented that they're afraid to recommend this because of the dosage, the gray area in the dosage. So I think what you're going to say is probably contact you afterwards, right?
Absolutely. If nothing else, I can share anecdotal real life information. I use CBD topicals on a regular basis. My wife has been using, as I had mentioned, CBD sublingual oil for a little more than 2 years now. Again, I go into that a little deeper on the first webinar from June, which you have the link to. But I would absolutely enjoy discussing that with any of you that call. I had dozens of people engage in direct one-on-one conversations, phone conversations with me after the last one. Please don't hesitate to do that.
Yeah, we have some people that are already asking that, and that is absolutely. So the information is up here, the phone number and Tim's email. Just reach out to him, and he'll get you on his schedule. He's going to be pretty busy here. We know just from the last one, which is good. We like to keep him busy. We certainly don't want him wandering around the building, wondering what to do. So
it's not good for anybody when that happens.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What else we got?
I think we're probably at the end here.
John Watkins has been monitoring any new questions coming in. John, any other ones in the last couple of months?
We've responded to all of them.
Great.
I think we just had one last question here that might be interesting too, is a compounding with CBD legality. I think that's a pretty easy question to answer.
Anytime we're into legality, my answer is check with your state board. The FDA has made their stance pretty clear, and the state boards of pharmacy are pretty clear. I'm gonna shy away from that one too, Linda.
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of questions about specific state rules, which we discussed in our last webinar. Nothing has really changed since then, right?
That's right. I have gone back and done some research. I have been on probably 20 websites for state boards of pharmacy over the past week or so, and I can't find anything more updated than June 19th for any of the states I was looking at. North Carolina, we had specific questions about North Carolina, California, Texas, Ohio, Missouri. The statements that I had mentioned in June still hold, just because either the state board has made their statement and they're silent, or they're maintaining their silence, which still says that 35 states you can sell CBD in your pharmacy. But I would just be very smart about it.
Right. One last question we probably have time for is age criteria. So is there any indications that a person who's, younger or older should be using this any differently?
That's a tough question. Evan, you have a thought or feeling on that?
Not particularly, other than Epidiolex, the only FDA-approved legend drug, which with CBD as its active ingredient is prescribed in childhood epilepsies. So can't say it's not safe for children, but can't really say much other than what the FDA has given us.
I don't think it's necessarily helpful to think in terms of age when we're talking about CBD, other than what Evan had talked about. As we age, the endocannabinoid receptors have less of an influence. So there is some research. Well, you know what? We're going to need to ask Dr. Russo that. I don't have the answer to that one.
Stay tuned in September.
Exactly. All right, so our time is up. I would like to thank everybody for attending this webinar. Please stay tuned with us. We are converting the webinars into podcasts to make it a little easier for people to listen to. And again, we welcome your emails, your suggestions for further webinars, and any subjects that you have that you really want to discuss in depth. Certainly feel free to reach out to Tim via the email or the phone number that's up there. We certainly love to hear from you and get that feedback.
We just hope we taught you some things you didn't know, and that's the whole point in an educational series. So I hope we did not fail at that task, and we will keep marching on the education for pharmacists. All right, folks, thank you. Bye-bye.